new renovated cemetery. The story that we brought of Eddie DeVico, who passed away this Pesach, right before Pesach. And here we have over here that he always mentioned how he wants the last completion that he wants to do before he dies, he wants to finish the cemetery. He texted me in February, I have the text. I finished finally the cemetery. A month later he was niftar. So just to recap, this is the Monsonego section of the cemetery. Towards the middle, where Lala Salika is, it's the Sarfati section. Towards the middle is the Sarfati section, where Rav Yehuda Benatar is as well. And on top is the Bet HaKnesset. And all the way down to the left is where you'll find the Serrero section and the Ebenzoor section. The Ibn Dinan section is also with the Monsonego section over here. So here you have the Ibn Dinan section you have over here with the Monsonego. So Ibn Dinan and Monsonego to the right, Ebenzoor, Serrero to the left, and in the middle, the Benatar and the Sarfati. Let me show you the come.
That's a video.
This is what I sent him in 3 languages. And it's printed. Wow. So this is from the link Kollel. Right over here. This is Rabbi Maimon Cohen, the chief rabbi of Morocco. He started in 1994. Rabbi Moshe Ben Dinan, who was in the Bedin Affairs. Put it upside down over here, 1977. This is one of Rabbi Shlomo Ben Dinan, one of the great Dayanim. And Rabbi Meir said was the teacher of Rabbi Maimon, a great Dayan. I just said a halakha about him. He said it's Hilula Hey Shvat. Maybe we'll make a video now. We'll make a video on this. We're over here in the cave of the lions, Gov Harayot, with the great Tsadikim of Fez. I'm standing over here by the cave of Rabbi Shlomo Ben Dinan. Rabbi Shlomo Ben Dinan wrote 2 famous Sfarim. Sefer called Bekesh Shlomo and Asher Shlomo. These are world-recognized Sfarim, are quoted in many of the works of the great Rabbanim. He was invited to be the chief rabbi of Morocco in Rabat, together with Rabbi Aflalo. Rabbi Aflalo insisted that he signs first and he's the Dayan. But then when Rabbi Vidal Sarfati in 1920 was, around that circa 1920 was niftar, Rabbi Shlomo Ben Dinan, who already comes from great Rabbanim beforehand, the Ibn Dinan family, was asked to be the Dayan. We had the zichut of working on the writings of the Bedin of Fez from the 1920s. It was originally Rav Vidal Sarfati, Rabbi Serrero, that is buried all the way to the left over there, as well as Rabbi Aaron Abudbol, my grandmother's uncle, that was also buried over there. They sat together in the Bedin when Rav Vidal Sarfati was niftar. Rabbi Shlomo Ben Dinan became the Av Bedin. His teshuvot, what can I tell you, Rabbatai, are like fire. He would sing by the drasha every kol nidre. He would cry and he would show us places in the Bet HaKnesset that are empty. He would show them places in the Bet HaKnesset that are empty, and he used to tell people to be chozeh b'teshuvah. And when he said one kol nidre before the year that he was niftar, he skipped ubiyom ha'kippurim hazeh anu ha'kippurim haba anenu leshalom. He skipped it. Kilo, it was a nevuah, it was a prophecy that he knew that it was his time to go. That was Rabbi Shlomo Ben Dinan, one of the great Dayanim and Tsadikim of Morocco. Yeh zichro baruch.
Amen.
The most recent chief rabbi of Morocco from the city of Fez. He's done in 1994 at 88 years old. He was on the Bedin for many years. He comes from cycle of great Rabbanim, the Dvarei Bet of Rabbi Didier Monsonego, the great Rabbi Yeshua Monsonego, Rabbi Aaron Monsonego, all these great Rabbanim for generations in the city of Fez. Subsequently, his son, Rabbi Aaron Monsonego, who used to bring an etrog from Morocco to the Brisker Rav for many years, his son Rabbi Aaron Monsonego was a chief rabbi as well of Fez, and he was niftar recently. His children live in Beit Vegan, and a lot of Rabbi Didier descendants, Baruch Hashem, are all b'nei Torah, Talmidei Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael. Here we're by the kever of Rabbi Meir Yisrael. Rabbi Meir Yisrael was known as one of the great teachers in the city of Fez of last generation. He was niftar on Hey B'Shvat. We just had his Hilulah, and if you remember, I made one video of halacha that he mentioned. We'll say the halacha in his name, where he mentioned that the minhag was to make a bracha of mezonot at the end of the meal. That was our minhag, like the Shulchan Aruch. And Rabbi Meir Yisrael was the teacher, as well as Rabbi Didier Monsonego, who was buried. There's a whole history of Rabbi Meir Yisrael over here. He was born in 1885, and he had tremendous respect. He was the judge. He was on the Bedin together with Rabbi Chaim David Serrero and Rabbi Didier Monsonego. Yehi zichro baruch.
Amen.
This is the kever of my grandfather, Rafael Rimoch, who is written over here. Po ben rigve afar ve'efer chotzev kever rigviat ish chamudot bal midot tovot shfal berech ve'anav. He was humble and unassuming. Me'ushar be'inyanav. He was content in his lot. Mechevrat gomlei chasadim. He would be part of the Gomlei Chasadim, those who would do chesed with others. Zeshem Atov Rafael Rimoch ben Yaakov Nishmato Edem was niftar at 58 years old on Friday of the 19th Yom HaShishi on Chodesh Iyar Shnat Tavshin Yudched LeYetzirah. And it's written over here, he was niftar in 1958, which was, he was young, he was 58 years old. And the story that we mentioned in our family, Mishpachat Rimoch, comes from a great lineage of community leaders and Rabbanim from the time of the exile of Spain. If you look in the Sefer Etz Chaim from Rav Chaim Gagin, who talks about the whole controversy of the Migurashim and the Toshavim at that time in the early 1500s. So there's a lot of Ben Rimochs that are mentioned, and they mention how originally there was the Rimochs that were Toshavim from Spain originally, but were Toshavim, were in Morocco before the expulsion of Spain, and those who came, I'm sure there was those who came afterwards as well. But this Ben Rimoch was an established family for generations. And Rabbi Rafael Rimoch, my grandfather, about 20 years before he was niftar, was already on his deathbed. He already had, I think, 6 children. He already had 6 children. 6 of my aunts and uncles already he had, and he was very sick on his deathbed already. The Chevra Kadisha came to say Kriyat Shema on him, and then all of a sudden he gets up singing Orech Yamim Ushnot Chayim Yosifu Lach. Long years should be added on to you. And he lived for another 20 years, where my aunt, 2 of my aunts, and my mother were born. So if it wasn't for that story, I wouldn't be here as well. So Yehi Nishmato Surat, Yehi Nishmato Surat B'Sorah Chaim.
Amen.
Of Rabbi Eliyahu Sarfati wrote a famous sefer called Tana de Bei Eliyahu, a student of the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. Rabbi Eliyahu Sarfati, it's written over here, he's the 18th generation to Rabbeinu Tam. 18th generation. He was born in 1715, niftar in 1805. He lived a long life, 91 years, and he was known as one of the great Tsadikim. Once again, they also had to move his kever, but he was known as the great Tsadikim and instrumental in a lot of Piskei Dinim. As I mentioned, they just put out his Sefer Tana de Bei Eliyahu recently with all of the Psakim. Yizichro Baruch. We're standing over here by the kever of Rabbi Vidal Sarfati that was niftar in Tafresh Pe Aleph, which is 1921. He was the Av Bedin of Fez, one of the direct descendants of Rabbeinu Tam. The Sarfati family is recorded in the Art Scroll book of early Acharonim. It's written that the Sarfati family moved from France, and you have the Sarfati Bet Knesset over here, the great Vidal Sarfati Arishon that you can see in the background where people are praying. The reason why it's so high up, Eli Deviko told me that when they tried to move the Bet Akvarot, that kever, when the Goyim tried to move it, they weren't able to, and when they tried, there was terrible things that happened. So that's why the kever of the great Rav Vidal Sarfati is there. But this is Rav Vidal Sarfati, who was niftar in 1921. Now, I want to mention a story that happened with our family and Rav Vidal Sarfati. There was a great hunger in the city of Fez. There was a great hunger in the city of Fez, and the Jews were dying. My grandmother's father, his name was David Aflalo, was a wealthy individual in the city of Fez, and he dedicated money to stop this hunger, and he told the king that to use these funds to help stop the hunger, and indeed this helped a lot. When Rav Vidal Sarfati, who was in Casablanca at the time, heard about this, he said that he said that he wanted his children to marry this Aflalo family. So my mother's aunt, her name is Simcha Aflalo, married Avner Sarfati, who was the son of Rav Vidal Sarfati, and he mentioned that they would be guaranteed Gan Eden for 5 generations. They would be guaranteed Gan Eden for 5 generations. That's the way the story goes. Is there Vidal Sarfati? Here we have the whole Sarfati family next to Lala Solika. We have Rav Avner Sarfati that was niftar in 1884. This is Rab Rafael Menachem Sarfati, 1901. You have Rav Vidal Sarfati, who was niftar in 1904. Another Rav Vidal Sarfati. Rav Avner Sarfati, niftar in 1884, was the grandfather. You see all of these generations, all great Tsadikim, all great Geonim. They wrote the Teshuvot, Tzuv Dvash, and other great works of Torah, Kabbalah, Drush, in all areas, and they were one of the most venerated families of Chachamim in Morocco. The Rav Vidal Sarfati Hasheni, that means his grandfather was Shin Ayin Tet, which was the first Rav Vidal Sarfati, and the second was this great Gaon Rav Vidal Sarfati, who, as I mentioned beforehand, they tried to move his kever when they were moving the whole Bet Akvarot, and bad things happened, and this was the stopping point. And it's written over here that all of these kvarim here are tzadikim that learned Torah from their Rav Vidal Sarfati. So it's unbelievable. He wrote the Sfarim, Sudvash ala Torah, Derech Kodesh on the Sifra, Imre Yosher on Midrash Rabbah, Sfarim on the Re'em of Rav Eliyahu Mizrahi, Otzar Nechvad on Teilim, Megillat Sarim, Megillat Esther, Tzad Rut, Megillat Rut, He wrote a lot on Drushim, on Tanakh, and his works are used till today. They're complicated, difficult works that a person has to sweat over. It was a tremendous, one of the greatest Talmidei Chachamim that Morocco ever had. This is the holy Rabbi Yehuda ben Attar, known in Morocco as El Kabir, the great rabbi. Although he has the same name, Orachai Makadosh, not related, but he did know the Orachai Makadosh. The Orachai Makadosh came to him for Askama on his Fadim. It said that when he came to the Beit Din of Fez, and he asked them for askama. So they wrote kehar, chav heresh, Or HaChaim HaKadosh, and the Or HaChaim HaKadosh responded, could you add on an extra mem? Kemoro harenu arab. That way they'll buy the sefer. And he said, we gave you kehar Hashem, and you want kemohara betulot, a play on the words. We gave you like a mountain, and you want like the amount that a betula gets in her kemohara betulot. Either way, he had a great connection. It's written in the Shem HaGdolim of the Chida on Rabbi Yehuda ben Atar that he went into a lion's den and he stayed there night and day and nothing happened to him. And it was known whenever there was a judgment between two Jews or even between non-Jews, they would come to Rabbi Yehuda ben Atar and they would swear. This is where they would swear, on this Makom HaKever. It was one time it was known that there was once a Jew who cheated a non-Jew. And the non-Jew said, fine, if you swear in the name of Yehuda ben Atar, I'll let you go. And this non-Jew swore, and this Jew swore, and right then and there, he became paralyzed, and it was a miserable time until they had to ask great mechila from Rabbi Yehuda ben Atar. Yehuda ben Atar is one of the authors of the Teshuvot, Shelot Teshuvot Mishpat Tzedakah B'Yaakov, Shelot Teshuvot, from the great Bedin Efez, many chidushim. One of his chidushim, he talks about why Moroccans didn't eat rice on Pesach. And he says it's not because we follow the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri that chametz, that rice is machvis, because we don't follow that. He says rather there must have been a ta'aruvot, there must have been a mixture, and therefore he deals with how about the kelim, the vessels that rice was cooked in. He deals with that at length. He deals with questions regarding taxing Talmidei Chachamim. Every single person in the community had to pay a tax. However, anybody who was Talmid Chacham was exempt. So the Bedin Efez of Rav Yaakov Ebenzoor, who was buried down there, as well as Vidal ben Atar, sat on these questions. What about somebody who learns, but he doesn't have, but he works a little bit. He has a side gig. What about somebody who's a shamash bet HaKnesset? What about somebody who's a shochet and a sofer? Are they also exempt, or is only great Talmidei Chachamim? These were some of the questions at the time that they dealt with, and tremendous didei mamonot, that a lot of their psakim were precedents for a lot of the decisions in the Bedin till today. And that is a lot of their Torah. Yehi zichro baruch. Amen ben yiratzon. This is all the Serrero family. There's Ramatatiya Serrero, the first, the second, the third, and they're all buried over here. Just to give you an idea, all the Tsadikim from down there, this whole line is the Serrero family. To give you an idea, all these great Tsadikim, they were well known in their generations, and they're remembered till today. Of Rabbi Haim David Serrero, who was niftar in the year Tav Shin Chav Zayin, 1967. He has a Bet Knesset over here, the Serrero Bet Knesset. He was well remembered. His Yortzeit falls on Tisha B'Av, on the day of the Evel of the Yehudim of Tisha B'Av. The same Hilul actually as Rabbi Avram Ben Diwan was also niftar on Tisha B'Av. And he was known as a Dayan that stuck to his principles. We were Zoche to publish, Machon Magen Avot in 2015, we're Zoche to publish the Sefer Shirut Teshuvot Chaim David Serrero. What's interesting over here is also a little bit of a closing of the circle, because Rabbi Chaim David Serrero, at the beginning of his career, served as a Dayan in Mogador, in Esfaria. And when he was there, Rav Chaim Pinto was niftar, and the children were orphans, and they needed help. And he drafted a letter together with Chaim David Ben Susan, the Dayan Ben Susan, of helping Rav Moshe Aaron Pinto, the father of Rav David Pinto Shlita. And really, I don't even know if he used this letter. I don't know if he used this letter, but they definitely were involved in helping the family. And many years later,
I was able to publish these works of Rav Chaim David Serrero in the Kollel in Toronto, which was under the auspices of the son of Rav Moshe Aaron Pinto, who was instrumental. David Pinto was instrumental in helping the Kollel in Toronto. As well, I was learning with one of the children, Ben Susan, who also in our Bet Knesset, Rabbi Ari Ben Shushan, Rabbi Yossi Ben Shushan, all the Ben Shushan brothers, they are descendants of this Rav Ben Shushan, who was on the Betin together with Rav Chaim David Serrero. So it's a whole closing of the circle. It's a whole closing of the circle of history. How history, one hand helps the other, and eventually they'll come back. Rav Chaim David Serrero has psakim on difficult cases that came to his door. Really bad cases of we'll call it the bottom of the barrel. Those who did all types of bad averot that had to come to Bedin, and each one of them he was posek properly, and he had patience for, and he was revered as one of the great rabbanim of Morocco of his time. Amen.
Amen.
This is the kever of the great Ebenzoor family, Rabbi Yaakov Ebenzoor, who sat on the Bedin of Rav Yehuda ben Atar. He was originally the Sofer, but then he sat on the Bedin of Rav Yehuda ben Atar. He also gave us Kamat Torah HaKadosh. Many of the piyutim that we have in our tefillot, for example, by the Tikkun HaGeshem, we have Leshoni Konanta, Leshoni Bonanta. There's 4 extra stanzas that are added in, that are written from the Bal Mishpat Uzdaka Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Ebenzoor. And here we have all of the children, the Rav Shlomo Ebenzoor, Rabbi Yaakov Ebenzoor, Rabbi Rafael Obed Ebenzoor, Rabbi Lev Ebenzoor, Rabbi Solomon Ebenzoor, Matatias Serrero, who was one of the great Serrero Rabbanim. They're all buried over here. So this is a tremendous place of Kedusha and of Tefillah, of these great Dayanim and Tsadikim for generations, the Ebenzoor dynasty. Chazaku Baruch. This is the kever of Rabbi Shmuel Elbaz. Rabbi Shmuel Elbaz was one of the teachers of Renovating HaKadosh, as it's written in the Hakdama of the Sefer Pri To'ar of Renovating HaKadosh, that he had all of the 48 kinyanim she'atorah nikrit bahem. Shmuel Elbaz was niftar only at 52 years old, and once again here as well they had to move his kever, and they had to arouse his kever. It's really interesting lashon. It's written just like we moved his bones, which is not so simple. It's a judgment when we have to move bones. He says, Yira avashid gagelu rachamav, just like his bones were rolled over, Hashem should also roll judgment, gagelu rachamav rachmet zetzav, and all of those who are his offspring. This is also one of the kvarim that people don't know about, but he was a tremendous gaon. You can imagine one of the teachers in the yeshiva, where the Renovating HaKadosh was in the yeshiva over here in Fez, and this was one of the rabbanim he learned with. Kedoshei Elyon Tsadikim Ugeonim. Yizichor Baruch. This is the kever of Rabbi Yaakov Kenizal, who is a 2nd or 3rd generation from the expulsees of Spain. Just to give you a little bit of a background, when Eli de Vico, who was buried a few meters down, was renovating this Bet HaKvarot, he found a little space, which is this one. This little space over here was written, Nimtza Kvurat HaKadosh Monen Yaakov Kenizal. And he didn't know who it was, and I didn't know who it was either. But as out of this whole Bet HaKvarot, it was a tiny space, and we didn't know who it was. After a little bit of research, we found out this was one of the great Chachamim that wrote an explanation on Perush Rashi and the Rav Eliyahu Mizrahi ala Chumash. One of the great Geonim that for generations in Morocco, when they needed a Yeshua for rain, they would come to this kever and they would pray this kever. It wasn't exactly in this exact space, because already a little bit later in 1884, because of they pushed the borders of the Melach towards a little bit back to leave a little bit room for the palace of the king. So they had to uproot his atzamot, his bones, and they moved the kever over here. This is the great Kadosh Rabbi Yaakov Kinizal, and this is the original matzeva, just to show you how many great chachamim and tzadikim from already close to the time of Gerush Sfarad are buried in this holy cemetery, and we don't even know. We know some of the famous ones, but there are some of the less famous ones. We don't even know how many great chachamim there are over here, and Rav Yaakov Kinizal is an example of that. Yeh zichro baruch.
Amen.
This is Rabbi Aaron Botbol. In the year 1866, Rabbi Aaron Botbol was born in the city of Fez. There was a tremendous plague. And the story goes that during this plague, he was a little baby, he was dying. Who was staying in this city at the time was the great Abir Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Abechsera. Rabbi Aaron Botbol's mother came and knocked on the door and pried the door down even though he didn't open. She pushed until finally he opened the door. He said, "My baby's sick," and he gave a bracha. And from there, Rabbi Aaron Botbol lived. Rabbi Aaron Botbol was known as a great dayan, very respected. I had the zechut of working on his writings from the Bet Din of Fez. He was very respected, revered. He was very honest. Anytime that there was a Bet Din case among the family or anything that he might have had a connection to, he recused himself from the din. He didn't want to be involved. What's interesting is that Baba Sali came to Rabbi Aaron Botbol for help to publish some of the Sfarim of the Abu Chatzera family, because Rabbi Aaron Botbol also was wealthy. There's a famous picture of him giving bar mitzvahs to orphans. It's a picture that goes around the family, and it's interesting how Rabbi Yaakov was going to give a bracha for Rabbi Aaron Botbol, and Rabbi Aaron Botbol was close to the Abu Chatzera family. As I mentioned, Baba Sali would be in touch with them, and Rabbi Shalom Abu Chatzera for the printing of their Sfarim. So really, it was the circle closed in that regard. Rabbi Aaron Botbol was on this bedin together with Rabbi Vidal Sarfati and his brother-in-law Rabbi Matatya Serrero, who was buried around here, as well as Rabbi Shlomo ben Denan, and he until he was appointed as the head of the bedin, and he was niftar. He retired a year before he was niftar, because at 80 years old already you couldn't serve as dayan. And a year later he died in 1947. He was niftar, and he was once again very well respected. And here he's in the chilka of the Serrero family. His brother-in-law was Rav Matatya Serrero. This is the kever of Rabbi Maimon Cohen, who was a great Rosh Yeshiva. If I'm not mistaken, Rabbi Meir Israel, who was buried, we saw at the beginning, to the right of the cemetery, he learned under Rabbi Maimon Cohen. Not many works, not many teshuvot do we know from him, but he was a big marbitz Torah in the city, and it's written over here that he was Adonenu Arava Mefusam Pe'er Hador VeHadaro. He was the crown of the generation, was known for his miracles, Dayan and Mitsuyan. We do not write this about everyone, Rabotai. There's a tremendous legacy about him. Harav Agona Kadosh Rabbeinu Maimon Cohen. Yeh zichro baruch. This is the house of the Rambam. Over here, it's written that he lived in this house from 1159 to 1116. He wrote the famous Sefer Moreh Nevuchim, Guide of the Perplexed, over here. And unbelievable that we're in his house over here. Outside, we're going to see there's also a clock that was made with his chokhmah, with his wisdom, a sundial clock.